I didn't catch her cheating the way people imagine it happens. No lipstick on a collar. No late-night texts lighting up the room. It was quieter than that, which somehow made it worse. It started with a receipt. I was 24, working 2 jobs in a town small enough that you couldn't sneeze without someone saying "bless you" from across the street. I just finished a late shift at the hardware store and came home to the apartment my girlfriend and I had shared for almost 3 years. Same couch. Same creaky floorboard by the kitchen. Same life I thought I understood. I emptied my pockets onto the counter. Keys, wallet, loose change, and that's when I saw it. A crumpled receipt from a restaurant across town. Not unusual by itself. Except the date was from the night before, and she'd told me she was too tired to go out and had fallen asleep early. 2 entrees. 2 drinks. 1 dessert. I remember staring at it like it was written in another language. My first instinct wasn't anger. It was logistics. I tried to make it fit into the version of reality I already had. Maybe she went with a coworker. Maybe she met her sister. Maybe I was overthinking everything, like she sometimes said I did. But the knot in my stomach tightened anyway. I didn't confront her that night. I put the receipt back where I found it, folded my jacket, and lay awake listening to her breathe beside me. Every inhale sounded borrowed. Every exhale felt like a lie slipping out unnoticed. Over the next week, things didn't explode. They eroded. She guarded her phone in small, careless ways, turning it face down, taking calls on the balcony, smiling at messages she didn't share. I told myself I was paranoid. I wanted to be wrong more than I wanted the truth. Then came the coffee shop. I was off early one afternoon and stopped by the only decent cafe in town. The kind of place where the barista knows your order by heart and your past eventually catches up to you. I was waiting for my drink when I saw her reflection in the window. She wasn't alone. She sat 2 tables away with a guy I didn't recognize. Early 30s, maybe. Confident posture. The kind of smile that doesn't ask permission. They leaned toward each other like gravity had already decided for them. I didn't storm over. I didn't shout. I paid for my coffee and left through the side door, hands shaking so badly I spilled half of it on the sidewalk. That was the moment something in me shut down. Not dramatically, not loudly. Just a quiet click, like a lock finally turning. That night, when I asked her directly, she didn't deny it. She sighed, like I'd asked her to explain a minor inconvenience. "It just happened," she said. "I didn't plan it." I remember nodding, as if that explanation completed a puzzle instead of destroying it. I moved out 2 days later. A duffel bag. A box of books. My pride, folded small enough to carry. For weeks, I existed on autopilot. Work. Sleep. Repeat. I avoided places we'd been together, which in a town that small meant avoiding almost everything. That's how I ended up in a bar I'd never liked much. Dim lights, cracked leather stools, and a jukebox stuck in the past. That's where I met her. She was sitting alone, reading a paperback with a cracked spine, completely unbothered by the noise around her. When she looked up, her eyes were calm in a way I hadn't felt in months. "Rough day?" she asked, like she already knew the answer. I didn't realize it then, but that question was the first step out of the wreckage. I didn't answer her right away. Rough day is one of those questions people ask without expecting honesty. It's a social formality, like saying, "How are you?" and moving on before the answer matters. But the way she asked it, head slightly tilted, book still open in her hand, made it feel different. Like she had time. Like she wasn't in a hurry to be anywhere else. "Rough few weeks," I finally said. She smiled, not the bright kind meant to cheer you up, but a knowing one. "Those are usually worse." I nodded and took a sip of my beer. The jukebox hummed something old and sad in the background. For a moment, we just sat there, 2 strangers sharing the same quiet. She closed her book and turned her stool slightly toward me. "I'm Claire," she said. I told her my name. No last name. No backstory. Just enough to exist in the moment. Claire was older than me, by almost a decade, as I'd later find out. But it wasn't the first thing you noticed. What stood out was how settled she seemed. Not bored. Not tired. Just steady. Like she'd already survived the kind of thing that was currently wrecking me. We talked about nothing important at first. The town. The weather. How this bar never changed its playlist. She teased me gently for ordering the cheapest beer on the menu. "Student?" she asked. "Former," I said. "Now just broke." That made her laugh. A soft laugh, controlled, like she chose when to let it out. At some point, She asked what had put me in that bar on a Tuesday night. I hesitated, then surprised myself by telling the truth. Not all of it. Just the headline. My girlfriend cheated, I said. Recently. Claire didn't gasp, didn't rush to reassure me. She just nodded slowly, like she was filing the information where it belonged. That'll do it, she said. There was relief in that response. No pity, no shock, just recognition. We talked for over an hour. About relationships. About mistakes that sneak up on you. About how small towns make it impossible to disappear, even when that's all you want to do. She told me she'd moved there a few years earlier after a divorce. No bitterness in her voice. Just facts. When I checked the time, I realized how late it had gotten. I stood up, suddenly aware of how close we'd been leaning toward each other. Well, I said, I should probably head out. Probably, she agreed. Then, after a beat, you'll be okay, you know. I shrugged. Doesn't feel like it. It won't. Not yet. She slipped her bookmark between the pages and stood. But you will. Outside. The night air was cool and smelled like rain. We walked out together, stopping by our cars. For a second, I thought that was it, that she'd been a moment, not a chapter. Then she said, I'm usually here on Thursdays. Same stool. I nodded, pretending my heart hadn't just jumped. Good to know. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Nothing had changed, really. My ex was still my ex. My apartment was still empty. My life was still in pieces. But for the first time since the coffee shop, the silence didn't feel like punishment. I didn't know it then, but that night wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of a much more complicated story, one that would force me to look at myself, my past, and the kind of person I was becoming. And Claire was right in the center of it. Thursday came faster than I expected. I told myself I wasn't going to go back to the bar. No reason to force the universe to hand me another stranger, but something in me needed the quiet calm she had offered. Something in me needed to see that steady confidence again, the kind that made the world seem smaller, more manageable. When I walked in, the bar looked the same. Dim lights, cracked stools, a faint smell of beer and old wood. And there she was, sitting at the same stool, book open, legs crossed, completely unbothered. Almost like she knew I'd come. I took the seat across from her. We didn't speak at first. Silence, when it's comfortable, is strange in a good way. You can almost hear the other person thinking, and not the things they say aloud. That first Thursday, I noticed the lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her fingers lingered on the page, the subtle way she leaned slightly forward when she wanted to be noticed. She closed the book after a few minutes. So, she said, arching an eyebrow. Survived the week? I laughed softly. Barely. Good start, she said. Barely surviving is still better than pretending to. It was a lesson I didn't know I needed. In a town this small, everyone wore masks. People smiled while silently hating their neighbors, pretending to love their jobs, pretending to forgive their partners. Claire wasn't pretending. She was honest, but not brutal. Honest, but gentle. That combination made me feel like I could breathe again. We talked for hours. About work, about past relationships, about the tiny absurdities of small-town life. I shared stories I had never told anyone. Not because they were interesting, but because they were mine. She listened like she was sorting through her own memories, drawing parallels, nodding at the right moments, smiling when my awkward humor slipped out. And then, gradually, the conversation turned. I don't remember exactly when it happened, but I realized I wasn't just talking about my ex anymore. I was talking about myself, my mistakes, my regrets, my anger. Claire didn't judge. She didn't rush to give advice. She just let me say the words, and for the first time, I felt them matter. When the bar started emptying, she didn't leave. Neither did I. We stepped outside, and the air had cooled since the last time we'd been there. Rain was coming, but neither of us cared. I'm glad you came back, she said. Her voice was quiet, thoughtful. Me too, I admitted. I wasn't sure I would. She smiled. That smile, calm and certain, somehow carried weight. Life doesn't work in straight lines, she said. Sometimes the detours are the only way to get where you're supposed to be. I didn't know what to say to that. I just nodded, aware that her words were landing deeper than she could know. We exchanged numbers, naturally, like we had done it hundreds of times before. Not flirty, not forced, just practical. But the small energy between us, the kind that isn't obvious at first, was palpable. There was curiosity, recognition, a quiet magnetism that pulled us both in without either of us needing to force it. That night, I went home with the uneasy feeling that something in my life had shifted. Not dramatically, not violently, but irreversibly. The pain of betrayal was still there, raw and buzzing under the skin. But now there was also a spark, a hint of possibility, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to carry this weight alone. I didn't know what the future held. I only knew that Claire's presence made it feel less like a punishment and more like a challenge. And for someone who had spent weeks hollowed out by disappointment, a challenge was the first kind of hope I had allowed myself to feel. The weeks that followed were gradual, almost imperceptible. We didn't rush anything. Each meeting, each shared coffee or quiet conversation was measured, deliberate. There was no instant romance, no fireworks exploding over empty streets. Just small moments, glances that lingered, subtle touches on the hand, laughs that felt deeper than polite conversation. It was intoxicating in a way I hadn't expected. I had spent so long wrapped up in anger and betrayal that I'd forgotten how slow, natural connections could be. One Friday evening, Claire suggested we take a walk through the old part of town, the area with brick sidewalks and faded storefronts. She said it was her favorite place to think. I followed, feeling a sense of calm I hadn't felt since discovering the receipt that had started all of this. We talked about everything and nothing. The conversation drifted from music we liked, to the way people in our town judged each other silently, to the absurdities of dating in your 20s. And then, unexpectedly, she asked about my ex. Not aggressively, not to dig, just gently, as though she wanted to understand the shape of my heartbreak. I told her the truth. Everything I hadn't admitted to anyone. The little betrayals I'd noticed, the silent doubts, the nights I'd cried into the ceiling, wondering if I had been too naive. She listened, quiet, with her hands in her coat pockets, nodding occasionally. There was no judgment in her expression, only understanding. And that, strangely, felt like permission to let go of my own shame. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, casting long shadows across the street, I realized that my anger was shifting. It wasn't gone, but it was becoming sharper, focused, not on destroying her or dwelling in bitterness, but on reclaiming the dignity she had taken for granted. I could feel it in my chest, a subtle, almost electric urge to correct the imbalance. Claire noticed, of course. "You've changed," she said. "There's fire in you again. Not the reckless kind, but the kind that knows what it wants." I smiled, unsure if it was pride or fear. "I just want to make things right." "And you will," she said, her voice low and deliberate. "But not by screaming or lashing out. You'll do it smart, subtle, poetic." It was the first time she had mentioned a plan of action. I didn't ask what she meant. The weight of the suggestion was enough to linger in my mind for days, shaping how I moved through the week. We spent more time together after that, not just walking or talking, but noticing the small details of each other's habits. How she tapped her pen when she was thinking, the way I frowned when I caught myself overthinking. Our connection deepened, measured and deliberate, a slow burn that neither of us tried to rush. And then, one evening, while we shared a quiet dinner in a tiny diner on Main Street, Claire leaned forward, her eyes serious. "We can't let this go," she said. "Not really. You deserve better than just letting her forget what she did." I looked at her, feeling a rush of gratitude and a flicker of something else, curiosity, excitement, maybe the faintest hint of mischief. "What do you mean?" I asked. "You'll see," she said, smiling that quiet, confident smile that made me feel simultaneously safe and charged. "We'll do it together." I didn't know what it was yet, but I trusted her. And for the first time since the betrayal, I felt alive in a way I hadn't thought possible. It was a delicate tension, the feeling of walking towards something unknown, yet inevitable. And somehow, it made every day feel like a game we were slowly, carefully winning, without even knowing the rules. It started subtly. Claire didn't rush me, and I didn't push. Our plan, such as it was, began as small observations, watching my ex from a distance, noticing her routines, the places she liked to frequent. I had spent months feeling powerless, letting the pain fester quietly. Now, for the first time, I felt agency. I wasn't seeking revenge for cruelty's sake. I was reclaiming the dignity she had disregarded. Claire was the architect. She had this quiet precision about her, honed from years of experience. She knew how to read people, how to anticipate reactions, and how to plant subtle seeds that would grow without seeming forced. Watching her work was mesmerizing. I learned more from her in one afternoon than I had in months of agonizing over betrayal. We began by creating small, carefully constructed coincidences. A mutual acquaintance, a casual mention of a new relationship, a social media post calculated to appear innocent but speak volumes. I watched my ex's reactions through the grapevine, noticing the tiny cracks in her carefully curated life. There was a subtle satisfaction in seeing her confusion, the realization that she wasn't as untouchable as she'd thought. But there was no cruelty in our actions, only the quiet assertion of truth. As we worked together, Claire and I grew closer. The connection we had built on conversation and shared silence now deepened into something more complex. There was tension in the air, a pull neither of us fully admitted, but it was tempered by trust and mutual understanding. Passion simmered in our glances, in the brushing of hands, in the way we leaned toward each other when the world around us was loud. It was slow, measured, deliberate, never rushed, never forced. It felt like learning to walk again after years of stumbling. One night, after a day spent laying the groundwork for another small, poetic reveal, we sat in her living room, the room lit by the soft glow of a single lamp. Claire poured 2 glasses of wine, and we clinked them lightly. I caught her watching me, her eyes assessing, almost daring me to let go. "You've changed," she said softly. "The anger isn't raw anymore. It's focused, and you're beginning to enjoy it." "Enjoy it?" I echoed, unsure whether she meant the subtle revenge or something else entirely. "You'll see," she said with a smile that was teasing but warm. "The rest comes naturally. You'll learn that what feels like satisfaction isn't just about them. It's about you reclaiming what's yours." We didn't talk about our relationship directly. We didn't need to. Everything between us existed in glances, in the comfort of silence, in the way our laughter mingled. There was an unspoken understanding that the intensity of our connection would deepen with time, but only if we moved carefully. Patience became its own form of intimacy. By the end of that week, I realized that I was no longer the same man who had found the receipt on the counter. I felt stronger, sharper, more alive. The betrayal still stung, but it had become a catalyst, not a chain. And with Claire guiding me, I was beginning to see the full picture, the subtle power of reclaiming control without losing oneself to rage. For the first time in months, I slept at night without that hollow ache in my chest. I dreamed instead of possibility, of clever moves yet to be made, and of a partnership that felt as rare as it was potent. Claire wasn't just my ally. She was a teacher, a confidant, and slowly, someone I wanted to trust with more than strategy. The thought both exhilarated and terrified me. But that was the point. Nothing worth pursuing ever comes without risk. It wasn't long before our little plan started showing results. Nothing dramatic, no confrontations, no public humiliations. Just small, undeniable shifts in the way my ex moved through the town, subtle ripples that made her notice she no longer held the upper hand. Claire had taught me the art of patience. The thrill wasn't in exposing her directly. It was in watching the consequences unfold quietly, almost naturally, like gravity doing its work. We'd meet at her apartment, or sometimes at the bar, and review what had happened that week. A mutual friend casually mentioning seeing my ex looking uneasy. A cryptic social media post that hinted at new alliances without calling anyone out. Every small success made me feel less like a victim and more like an architect of my own life. And Claire was always calm, always precise, pointing out nuances I'd never noticed. One evening, after another quiet victory, we found ourselves walking along the Old Town Bridge. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. I had thought revenge would feel hollow, but with Claire, it felt purposeful, clean, focused. We didn't need to scream or yell. Every calculated step was a small triumph, a reclamation of my dignity. And she was right there beside me, not as a shadow, but as a partner, guiding, observing, teaching. "Funny, isn't it?" Claire said, her voice soft. "How satisfying it is when you don't have to hurt anyone. Just let life do the work." I nodded, feeling the weight of that truth settle into my chest. The thrill of empowerment was intoxicating, but tempered by the respect she showed for boundaries. She wasn't about cruelty. She was about justice in its quietest, smartest form. And I had never understood before how that could feel so intoxicating. Our connection deepened during those long evenings. Not in ways that could be measured by words, but in shared glances, lingering touches when no one was watching, the quiet heat of presence without needing explicit acknowledgement. The attraction between us was deliberate, restrained, a slow burn that neither of us pushed to rush. It was passionate because it was carefully nurtured, not because it was impulsive. One night, after an hour of talking and laughter that felt almost sacred, she reached for my hand. I didn't pull away. Not then, not ever again. It was a moment of trust, of acknowledgement, of understanding. We didn't speak about what it meant, but in that small, quiet gesture, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about growth, about connection, about finding someone who saw the real me and still wanted to stand beside me. By now, I knew my ex was starting to notice the shift. Not in dramatic, obvious ways, but in small, subconscious adjustments. The way she avoided eye contact in town, the sudden hesitation when she mentioned her social life, the quiet frustration that didn't need explanation. Each instance was a reminder of the power of subtlety and of the influence Claire and I could wield together without ever raising a hand. And yet, even as satisfaction built quietly, I felt an undercurrent of something more dangerous: attachment. A growing dependence on Claire's presence, her insight, her guidance. It was intoxicating, thrilling, and terrifying all at once. I realized that part of my revenge was no longer just about my ex. It was about me, about reclaiming life, identity, and desire after being wronged. We were no longer merely participants in a subtle game of retribution. We were allies in every sense, partners navigating a complex dance of emotion, strategy, and quiet passion. And in that moment, standing on the bridge with her hand in mine, I understood that whatever came next, I would face it not alone, but with someone who made the world feel steady again. The small victories continued, but now there was an added layer to our partnership. Claire had begun teaching me how to anticipate not just my ex's actions, but the subtle ways people reacted when their illusions were threatened. I learned to observe without being obvious, to plant hints and let them grow, to manipulate perception without cruelty. It was almost an art form, and working alongside her made every moment feel like a lesson in strategy and self-restoration. One afternoon, we met at her apartment to plan the next phase. She had laid out notes in her neat handwriting, timelines, and potential outcomes. I felt both nervous and excited. Every decision carried weight, yet it was calculated, careful, precise. Claire noticed my tension and placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. "Relax," she said softly. "This isn't about rage. This is about reclaiming what's yours. You won't lose yourself if you stay mindful." Her touch lingered longer than necessary, and I felt a heat that had nothing to do with anger. It was subtle, controlled, but undeniable. The kind of intimacy that comes from shared purpose, mutual trust, and the thrill of a slow-burning connection. Over the next few weeks, we escalated our plan in small, deliberate ways. A carefully worded message sent to mutual friends, a coincidental sighting at the local cafe, a social media post hinting at growth and resilience. Each act was small, almost invisible to anyone not paying close attention, but they were effective. My ex's confidence wavered in tiny increments, and the satisfaction of seeing her subtly unsettled was accompanied by a strange sense of catharsis. I wasn't seeking vengeance in a traditional sense. I was creating a reality in which my voice, my experience, and my dignity mattered. Our partnership deepened alongside the strategy. Each encounter carried tension and warmth, laughter and quiet glances, the kind of connection that builds over shared understanding rather than forced words. There was a slow-burning chemistry between us, tempered by patience and awareness. Every touch, every shared smile, felt like a confirmation that we were aligned, not just in plan, but in something deeper. One evening, after a particularly effective small maneuver, a social post that subtly exposed her dishonesty without naming anyone, I found myself standing outside Claire's door. I wasn't expecting anything, just wanting to share the success. When she opened it, she looked at me with that calm, measured expression that always made me feel simultaneously exposed and safe. You did well today, she said. But don't let it go to your head. It's not about winning. It's about being intentional. I nodded, though inside I was buzzing with exhilaration. I wanted to say more, to express the swirl of emotions I was feeling, gratitude, excitement, desire, but I didn't. We stood there, in silence, letting the air carry the intensity between us. That night, I walked home feeling both lighter and more alive than I had in months. The anger that had hollowed me out was now focused, transformed into strategy and subtle empowerment. And Claire, she had become indispensable, not just in the game we were playing, but in the way she made me feel steady, seen, and capable again. I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The path ahead would be intricate, deliberate, and full of lessons I hadn't yet anticipated. And somehow, I trusted that with her by my side, we could navigate it all, together. The tension between us was becoming more complex, but we never rushed it. Our connection thrived in restraint, in the quiet moments when a look or a brush of hands said more than words ever could. Claire had this way of making the ordinary feel charged, of turning a simple conversation into a lesson in presence and trust. And I was learning, slowly, how to be patient, how to balance desire with purpose. By now, my ex was noticeably unsettled. Nothing overt, no confrontation, just small cracks in her composed facade. Mutual friends mentioned odd behavior, fleeting expressions of guilt, or sudden defensiveness when her social life was casually mentioned. Every observation confirmed that our subtle efforts were working. But more than that, the act of planning and executing these small strategies alongside Claire made me feel alive again. I was no longer a passive victim. I was an active participant in shaping my world. One evening, we met at the small diner on Main Street, our usual spot for planning. Claire had drawn up a few ideas for the next week, her handwriting neat, her observations meticulous. I watched her as she spoke, noting the precision with which she analyzed the situation. There was a calm confidence in her that contrasted sharply with the chaos I had felt after discovering the betrayal. "You're doing better than you realize," she said, looking at me directly. "It's not about them anymore. It's about you, how you choose to reclaim your life." I nodded, absorbing the weight of her words. They weren't comforting in a shallow sense. They demanded awareness, responsibility. I felt a surge of admiration for her, but also a subtle spark of something else. Desire, yes, but tempered, controlled, purposeful. Later, we walked through the quiet streets of our small town, the night air crisp, filled with the faint scent of rain. We spoke in low tones, sharing thoughts and observations, sometimes pausing to simply exist in each other's presence. There was a rhythm to our interactions now, a balance of strategy, intimacy, and subtle tension that made every moment feel deliberate and meaningful. I realized that my feelings for Claire were deepening in ways I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just attraction. It was trust, admiration, and the thrill of partnership. The subtle passion that simmered between us was secondary to the connection we had built on shared purpose, on intelligence, on understanding. And yet, it was impossible to ignore. The next week brought a small but significant moment. A post we had carefully planted had prompted a reaction from my ex. Hesitation, defensiveness, a quiet anxiety that was visible only if you knew what to look for. Seeing it unfold was strangely satisfying, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because it confirmed that truth had a way of asserting itself, even without aggression. That night, as Claire and I reviewed the week's outcomes, our conversation turned personal. We spoke about our pasts, our mistakes, the ways life had shaped us. Every word strengthened the bond between us. Every shared insight a subtle promise of something deeper. The attraction was undeniable now, simmering under the surface, but it was intertwined with respect and understanding, an intimacy built on trust and shared experience, not impulsive desire. For the first time in months, I felt in control of my life. Betrayal had not destroyed me, it had reshaped me. And with Claire at my side, I was learning how to move forward, not recklessly, not vengefully, but deliberately, with purpose, and with passion tempered by wisdom. The next stage of our subtle campaign required more finesse. Claire and I had to anticipate every move my ex might make, but now it wasn't just about exposing her dishonesty. It was about ensuring she felt the weight of her own choices without the situation ever descending into chaos. Claire called it poetic balance, and I began to understand why. It wasn't about punishment, it was about restoring equilibrium. We spent Saturday mapping out routines, observing patterns, and predicting reactions. Claire had a talent for noticing the smallest details, the way someone shifted their weight in a conversation, or the micro-expressions that revealed unspoken truths. I watched and learned, internalizing every lesson. By now, my own observations had sharpened. I could sense tension before it became obvious, and I began to anticipate outcomes in ways that felt almost instinctual. It was during one of these sessions at Claire's apartment that our connection deepened in a way that startled me. We were reviewing a particularly delicate maneuver, and our hands brushed over the papers on the table. A simple contact, nothing deliberate, yet it sent a subtle jolt through me. Claire didn't pull away. She looked at me, and there was that quiet, measured intensity in her eyes that made the world outside fade. "Focus," she whispered, teasing but firm. "The plan comes first." I laughed softly, but my pulse was quickened. That mix of restraint and intimacy was intoxicating. It was different from anything I had felt before, a controlled, deliberate tension that simmered just beneath the surface. And yet, it felt safe, empowering, and even nurturing in a strange way. By the following week, our strategy bore visible results. My ex's composure was cracking, subtly but unmistakably. Friends mentioned her defensive comments, fleeting irritation, and hesitancy in public situations. Each observation confirmed what Claire and I had orchestrated. The satisfaction wasn't in her humiliation. It was in watching truth naturally assert itself, and in feeling my own agency restored. Evenings with Claire were no longer just planning sessions. We would linger, sharing meals or quiet walks, and our conversations drifted into personal territory, hopes, regrets, fears, and lessons learned. Every word deepened the bond. Every glance reinforced the trust. There was passion now, restrained yet undeniable, simmering beneath our careful interactions. It wasn't impulsive desire, it was deliberate, meaningful connection. One night, after a particularly successful maneuver, a public but subtle exposure that forced my ex to acknowledge her misdeeds, I walked Claire to her door. We paused under the porch light, the air crisp, and for a moment, the tension between us was tangible. "You've grown," she said softly. "Not just in what you're doing, but in who you are. I'm proud of you." Her words struck me in a way nothing else had. It wasn't praise for victory, it was recognition for growth. I felt a warmth spread through me, equal parts gratitude, admiration, and longing. "Thanks," I said quietly. My hand lingered near hers, and she didn't move away. The connection between us felt electric, alive, and entirely unforced. I walked home that night with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. Betrayal had left a scar, but it had also forged a path, one guided by strategy, patience, and the subtle power of truth. And through it all, Claire had become not just an ally, but someone whose presence altered the way I perceived myself and the world around me. The game we played was almost over, yet the lessons, the connection, and the slow-burning intensity between us were just beginning. I was no longer the hollow, betrayed man from weeks ago. I was learning to thrive, to reclaim control, and to embrace a connection that was both exhilarating and grounding. It all came to a quiet culmination one evening at the small town's annual fair. Not a dramatic showdown, not a confrontation, but a moment where everything we had worked toward revealed itself naturally. My ex wandered through the crowd, laughing a little too loudly, trying to maintain composure. The subtle cracks were visible if you knew what to look for, the hesitation in her smile, the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. And I knew exactly why. Claire and I moved through the fair together, side by side, unnoticed yet undeniably present. Our connection had grown from subtle glances and careful planning into something deeper, trust, admiration, and a simmering passion that never needed to be forced. Every laugh we shared, every touch, felt like an affirmation that we were aligned in both purpose and emotion. As we watched the Ferris wheel turn in the distance, Claire whispered, "It's done." Not with shouting or anger, but with truth. "You've reclaimed what's yours." I nodded, feeling a wave of relief and satisfaction wash over me. The betrayal that had hollowed me out was no longer a chain. It was a lesson, a catalyst for growth. And in that moment, I realized that my connection with Claire was more than partnership and strategy. It was a bond forged through patience, subtlety, and the shared understanding of what it means to be hurt and to rise above it. We wandered to a quiet corner of the fairgrounds, away from the noise and lights. For the first time, we allowed ourselves to acknowledge the tension that had been simmering for weeks. Our hands touched, lingering, a deliberate pause that carried more meaning than words could convey. I felt her presence as a grounding force, a steady counterpoint to the chaos that had once consumed me. "Funny," I said quietly, "how life brings you to the right place, even when it feels broken." Claire smiled, her gaze steady. "Sometimes the detours are the only way to get where you're supposed to be." That night, walking home through the quiet streets, I reflected on the journey. Betrayal had seemed like an endpoint, an irreversible wound. But through patience, strategy, and the presence of someone who understood, it had become a beginning. Claire had not only helped me navigate the aftermath of deception, but had opened a door to growth, resilience, and a connection I hadn't thought possible. We didn't need dramatic confessions or declarations. Our partnership, both in subtle retribution and in the slow-building intimacy between us, had transformed me. I had learned that revenge isn't about cruelty. It's about reclaiming your life and dignity. And in that reclamation, unexpected bonds can form, deep, measured, and enduring. By the time I reached my apartment, I understood that the story of betrayal had changed its shape. It was no longer about loss. It was about empowerment, trust, and the rare kind of connection that arises from shared experience and mutual understanding. Claire had taught me that passion and purpose could coexist, that desire could be deliberate, and that strength often comes not from aggression but from patience and subtlety. As I looked back on the events of the past weeks, I realized something profound. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was learning to live fully, to reclaim myself, and to embrace the future with someone who had become indispensable, not because of fire or impulsivity, but because of steady, measured, and undeniable presence. And in the quiet of that small town, under the soft glow of streetlights, I knew that what had begun as heartbreak had transformed into something stronger, wiser, and far more enduring than I could have imagined.